Well, hello everyone. I hope you're having a great, relaxing day. And even if you are, maybe you've had one of those days off, or maybe you have just been able to like start the day with some meditation, maybe even gotten in some exercise. Even if you're having one of those not so stressful days, we know that things can happen at any moment that increase our stress, right? And stress is something that is so important for us to address from a standpoint of helping people and ourselves get and stay healthy. And part of that is because stress is something that, and the reason I say first for us to assess it and then to address it is stress is something that naturally happens in the body, right? We have a stress management system. The body, as the stress response, is actually something intentional that the body is designed with. But what we certainly know is that life in 2022, even over the last 20, 30, 50, 60 years, life is stressful. And that stress, what we're seeing in individuals is that there are times of elevated stress. And there may be for certain times of the year, certain life stages where there is even high level, that elevated stress is happening for a longer period of time. Well, elevated stress is something that directly correlates to negatively, unfortunately, to our health. And that's really what we want to help people understand and be able to distinguish and then also address. Because here's the thing, whether it's us as individuals, as practitioners, or whether it's our patients, everybody's been hearing about stress and everybody's experiencing stress. And we're often told that we need to address our stress. But until we make the distinction of what kind of stress actually needs addressing, like what is the stop and address this stress right now, it doesn't actually seem like something that is more doable for us, more approachable. And as a result, we have people, maybe it's even happened to you, I know it's happened to me, where it's like, I know I should work on my stress levels, but that's even creating more stress for me, right? It's like it feels, like an additional stress. I don't know if I'm alone on that part, or thumbs up, heart, if that's happened to anybody else on here. So one of the things that I started working on about 10 or 15 years ago, it was probably closer to 15 years ago in my practice, was having people develop a habit of stress assessment. Part of that is actually recognizing when the body is sending signals, just like with the digestive system, actually hearing and experiencing those signals and being able to identify that those are signals of elevated stress and signals of prolonged elevated stress that we need to address in the moment. And then, so developing that habit can be really important because it allows us to check in and just to become aware of, are our stress levels elevated and are they something we need to address? And then the other part is separating out when our stress is at that elevated level and noting that we need to be able to, there are certain times where we need to stop and actually address it at that level. So, as would happen when there are things that have been really successful in my practice, and as I've helped other practitioners use them, we turn them into tools here at BNP for practitioners. And today I wanted to go through our most recent tool. What's interesting about this tool is that we also, in our programs, which are available, for practitioners to purchase for their patients, in our tools, we do some of these things already. In our programs, we do what's in this tool already. So one of the ways that the BNP toolkit can work with the BNP programs for you is if stress is something that somebody is concerned about or is even interested in addressing, or it's something that you want to talk about, say in your marketing, your social media, your emails, your lives, if you're doing, maybe you want to do an activity for, an employer group or, something else like that. You can actually use the content, you can use what I'm about to show you from the tool, and then from that, if people need to actually work on this, then you can have them go through one of the programs, and if you're a coach, you'd be able to coach them through that, or if you're a non-coach practitioner and you want to be able to have our team take them through that, you would be able to do that as well. So let me walk through. Let me know if you have any questions off the bat about assessing stress, tongue twister for me, and then also addressing stress, and I'll be sure to answer those. But I thought, as I typically do, that I would start off and demo this new tool for you. Okay, great. Let me come over here. All right, so the title of the tool is How to Assess and Address Stress Better. And as I was just sharing with you, one of the things that's the most important for us to do is to not just give a blanket to somebody, a blanket statement about we really need to work on stress, or all of us need to work on stress. There are different kinds of stress. There are different degrees of stress. And we want to start to teach people what really needs, when do we need for them to stop and really pay attention to addressing their stress as a way to really help them see significant improvements in their overall outcomes. And so we start off discussing that, like how it can just even feel so challenging to hear about how bad stress is for you, how we need to address it, et cetera. And you're like, I gotcha. But how, when, like, how do I even deal with this? Because part of my stress is that I'm not able to deal with everything right now. So what we talk about here is, what a stress, why we're doing a stress assessment. And the first part of it is to note that our body actually does send us signals. So one of the things that we want to do is we want to get really clear on, if I am having these signals, anxiety, elevated heart rate, cold, clammy skin, bloating, loose stools, racing thoughts, like all of these, I'm not going to go through all of them. If I'm having these symptoms, these might be ones that say, like, you know what, right now, you actually need to stop and address your stress because your body is giving you clear signals, right? And it is also important when we're talking about stress, to give people some good news. And so we do put the good news in here is that, your body is designed to handle stress. And that's why your body actually gives us signals that the body's stress levels are too elevated. And there are things then that we can do in real time to address that. So if your body is sending any of these signals, and so we want to do is do a check-in on our body. If our body is sending any of these signals, that might be one that's going to be a moment from that stress assessment where we're like, hey, wait a second, am I experiencing any of this? And my recommendation from a stress assessment standpoint is that we start to work on a habit of checking in on our stress at least 2 times in the day. So 2 times in the day could be brushing our teeth morning and evening. And why do I say that? Because in those moments, we actually can pretty much stop doing everything else. If you want to continue brushing your teeth, I have no problem with that. But you stop and you can actually see in those moments and ask yourself some questions, and I'll get into that. I usually recommend a third assessment time or third stress check-in at some point in, say, the middle of the day, perhaps that middle afternoon sort of witching hour, that 2 to 3 p.m. That's a great time. But for others of us, there may be specific times, maybe during the week, on the weekends, etc., specific times or experiences where we know that we want to actually do a stress check-in because we're working on something. Maybe we've already identified that our stress levels tend to go up, or there's some triggers that are happening there. So the first place would be is if we are experiencing any of these things, we want to actually realize that these are signs that our body has elevated stress. And the second is doing the stress check-in will help us identify if we're experiencing elevated stress. So doing this, first of all, this is important to explain to everybody. This is free. Yes, there are other tools that we can use to address stress and to assess it. And you may be using some of these with your patients, but it's really great that in this time period, especially because we know financial stress is one of the most significant stress, to actually talk to people about this is something we can absolutely do for free. And this is as a result, developing a habit around this is going to be so valuable for them. So it's just explaining we can do the stress check-ins. And if doing 3 or even 2 feels way too stressful, pick 1 time. So you can always start with just 1. And in that moment, you want to stop doing other things and you want to answer the following questions. On a scale of 1 to 10, where 1 is the lowest stress, there's no 0 stress. The body always, just the experience of being alive is some stress on the body. 1 and 10 is the highest. Where would you rate your stress? And then additionally, is your body actually sending you any of those signals that we had mentioned before? So, when you address, when we're doing this stress check-in, when do we know that we need to actually address our stress? Well, if our stress check-in revealed that we're greater than 6 on the stress scale, remember it's your scale, right? It's not one that is predetermined. Then it's really essential at that moment that you actually stop and address your stress until it's a 6 or a less. And I'll come back to how we do that in a moment. And then if you address it and you're in like kind of that 5 to 6 zone, it's probably, if you can allow yourself the time and if you can get in the habit of trying to bring your stress down to a less than a 5, that's really going to be optimal. So greater than a 6, need to, less than a 6, but still higher than a 5, so in that 5 to 6, optimal to go ahead and do that. And then certainly if your body is sending you any of the signals, don't worry about the number is, really it means that you should stop and work on reducing your stress on that piece. So then how do we go ahead and do this? Well, there are tons of different ways that we can address elevated stress. And what's interesting is they don't necessarily all work, or said differently, some of them work a lot better for certain types of stress, right? So if my dog or my kids or just my life, whatever, is just feeling like super unmanageable, overwhelming, laughing it away may actually just be like, oh my gosh, finding something to laugh. And we got to really laugh for 60 full seconds. That may actually work. If we're in a mode where something is so stressful like finances, and it's about healthcare bills, and it's about, and it really is, I don't know how we're going to be okay, laughing it away may not work. I just want to, that in that situation, it may not. It could for you, but it may not. And so in that instance, maybe letting it go away, like maybe we can start the practice of for 3 to 5 minutes, or maybe you can use a guided meditation. Maybe that is going to be effective for you. Maybe breathing, and doing some really good quality breathing. Maybe doing a HIIT workout. Maybe like, any of these other different ways. Maybe I say have mom send it away. Getting out into nature. Maybe smelling. And maybe some of these things aren't going to actually fully make it go away. Remember, I'm not suggesting that we get down to a 1. I'm just trying to take something that's greater than a 6 and bring it under a 6, or take something that's a 5 or a 6 and bring it under a 5 on that part. So we've got all of these different ideas for you on that part. And in that moment, once we've been able to go through and do that, and usually most of these are around, like they take somewhere around maybe 3 minutes to do, right? In that time period. Then in that time, and certainly you can do them for longer. After that, then you want to go ahead and reassess your stress. And at that time period, you want to see, did things actually get better? And if they did, as I wrote on here, you have taken an action, you've started assessing your stress, you've done either a check-in or you've assessed your stress in response to how your body is feeling, permission to be done, granted, and move on. So what we've done is we've taken our bodies out of elevated stress, and they're probably experiencing some stress still. 5 or 6 is still, a significant amount of stress, but they're not in elevated stress mode. And that means that you are going to be able to go do whatever else it was you're going to do, and then check back in at a later point, and continue to do that. And that may be as far as you get, and especially with clients, patients who are, dealing with, so many people are dealing with just so many different things these days. That may be where somebody is, and for right now, this first part of it and trying to cultivate this habit is going to be like the best first step that they can take. And even just starting off with one stress check-in, or one when I have any of these stress responses that my body is sending me these signals, I want to go ahead and do this. And that is plenty. And by the way, this could be something that you work on for a couple months. This could be something you work on for a year. And this could be absolutely where you stop. We did add to this because what I found was, after working with patients for a period of time, is that they were like, you know what, I'm noticing that I feel better when I do these, but I'm wondering, could I go the next step to actually working on preventing my elevated stress? And the answer is absolutely. It's something that can really, as we start to do this, it's hard. I just want to be blunt about that. It's hard work. It is work. And at times it may feel harder. But one of the things that we want to recognize is that when we're able to do this, this may be essential to optimizing your health, especially if you're working through a healing process, to being able to letting go of certain things and work on this. So how do we do that? Well, for any prevention of things, it really demands that we get to the root cause. We have to understand not just the triggers in the moment, but going deeper. I like to say that the 2-year-old, but why? Like, so we got to go deeper on that part to identify the true source of the stress and determine what those triggers were. So here I gave some examples. I want to ask you, was my stress elevated before the current trigger occurred? So I might say, it's so stressful for me when I pick up the kids from school. Like, that's really stressful, especially, if I haven't gotten done what I, typically like on a day, if I haven't gotten done what I want to get done. But I note that that's really stressful. And so then the question mark is, let's back it up. What's happened before that, and what's gone on a little bit before that and gone on a little bit before that? Because more than likely, maybe that moment where you pick up the kids and something's gone wrong, or whatever it is that's causing stress, that's just an isolator, what we call the icing on the stress cake, right? Like, that's just the topping. So what we really need to do is understand what were those triggers that were below. And then here is what's the most important. We need to identify, do we have significant control over whatever it is that stressor, that root cause stress? Do we have significant control? This is a big one, everybody, because wishing that someone you love would behave a different way, or wanting something in the world to be different, And by the way, all of those things you can play an active role, but you don't necessarily have control over them. And that's really hard because for those, we need to do something totally different. If I don't have significant control, then I have to acknowledge that. That is what is going to help me with stress prevention. I have to acknowledge that when I hear in the news, when I'm on Twitter, when I hear something that makes me just so stressed about the world, or when I see somebody, who I am so worried about their health because they're eating the wrong way, or they're not eating well for themselves, and I see them eating a certain way, and they're so I don't have any more control. I have to acknowledge that. And some of the ways that we can do that is we can journal it, we can speak into our phone, we can speak into a mirror, we can talk about how it makes us feel, because I'm not discounting your feelings. Your feelings are super important. But what we have to come back to is I don't actually have any type of control. And this may be something that you actually do need to work with a professional and work with a coach on, to release the impact of this stress that we don't have control over. Super, super important. Now, on the flip side, stress that we have significant control over is going to be something that we need to work on. But the unfortunate part is many of us have a combination of, and a lot of times our stress gets to that elevated state because we have an underlying amount of stress we don't have significant control over, and we're adding to it stress that we do have significant control over. So if we can remove and reduce or prevent the buildup of some of the stress that we don't have significant control over, it's actually going to make it a lot easier for us to minimize the impact of the stress that we do have control over. So let's come over to how do we address. The way that we address the stress that we have significant control over is by taking your better stress addressing action. So in this instance, if we answered a yes to having a good amount of control over the true stress source, then our better next step at that point is to determine what action to take to reduce that or keep that stress from becoming elevated. And this is what I call the could exercises. So I want us to just experiment with coulds. And it's almost like building what I call a decision tree to see all the different choices in this case. So for example, and by the way, you may totally need help doing this, or it may be helpful doing this with others. I love having, sitting with a friend and going through, can you just let me go through this? Or I just want to go through, and could you help me figure out all the coulds so that I can see a way through to something that I'm going to commit to, that I'm going to experiment with. One of the important things during this time period is to dream big. It's kind of like in brainstorming, they say there are no silly questions, there's no stupid question, any of this stuff. You got to dream big with the coulds, right? Could I just quit my job? Could I not pick up my children from school? Could I, just go with everything for a moment, right? Where I'm not saying you're abandoning your children at a school or you're quitting your job right now, but when you let yourself go into the big coulds, suddenly you see your way through to what you could experiment with, what could be possible. So these are some of an example of the could questions would be, for example, when I get home from work, I'm always stressed about needing to get dinner ready and also wanting to exercise because I'm supposed to be, I'm trying to fit in exercise for my health, needing to get the dog to exercise because the dog has been waiting for me since I got home, and kind of also wanting some alone time, right, on that part. And then working backwards, I need to be thinking about here, on that part, I want to start to think about what are some of the coulds that I could, and just decision tree, and just play with this. And remember, better not perfect, let's just see some different things. Could I get some alone time at work before I come home? Maybe I wouldn't be craving so much alone time if, let's say I work somewhere and I'm just around people and I have to show up and I just feel honestly completely drained, I'm an introvert and I've had to talk to people all day and now I need some, so could I implement some alone time in there? Is there something I could do en route to getting home that would change how I feel? Could I have an essential oil, something in my car? Or could I listen to some sounds? Maybe there's something that would be helpful for me in the car, or walking. Maybe one of the coulds could be, could I take the dog for a walk, which would give me some alone time and some exercise as well, or at least alone from humans. Could somebody else do that? Could I actually have somebody walk the dog? Could it be somebody else's chore? Could we have a dog walker? Could we, whatever it is, just figuring out that piece. And then going on with these other coulds on that part. And then after you do your could list, you want to go through and pick out a maximum, an absolute maximum of 3. Now, usually when I do a Quizlet, I have about 20 that are in there. And so picking out about 3, and you want to figure out which ones you're going to test out and decide, am I going to try them for 1 month? Am I going to try them for a week? And then as you're going through the experiments, you just see how the codes work, and how they don't work. And remember, in an experiment, it's not you being successful or failing. It's just for us to see, is the experiment a success or a failure? So that's also really important to express to your patients and clients on that part. By doing it this way, it's not about them being successful or not. We may identify from a successful experiment something that actually helps them feel better. Well, that's great, and then we move on from that. We may also identify from an experiment something that doesn't work. And by the way, that is also a successful experiment because we check it off the list and we try something else on that part. And I do want to note that doing some of these could be stressful. Because I'm asking you to do an unknown, which creates uncertainty, and uncertainty is stressful. But because there's the potential in this experiment for it to also prove to be something that helps you feel better, we want to try to go in and manage that the stress around that uncertainty and say, I think it's something that's going to help me. And one of the things I found with my patients was actually talking that through. Hey, you've identified 3 coulds. Do any of these feel particularly, like, as much as they're exciting that you're thinking you could do this, hiring a dog walker, but is that actually stressful? Because now are you going to be thinking and feeling bad about spending that money on that, right? And is that going to add to your financial stress? So let's talk that through before we actually determine that that's going to be the one that we're going to try, and that kind of thing. So then we go in and actually ask them to do that, and that's how we are able to move it forward. So let me pause here and turn it back to you all and just ask to see if there are any questions that you have first and foremost about actually doing sort of this experience of helping patients or clients assess and address their stress, taking this on. One of the things that I encourage each of you to do is to actually try this yourself. So this is something that I have totally mentioned I've been doing for, gosh, I think it's at least 15 years with my patients, but it is something that I learned to do myself long before that, that in particular really helped me with some of my digestive symptoms. And you all know, I'm the hugest fan of, magnesium and glutamine and all these other, there's so many nutritional wins, but you can't discount the role of stress in digestion, right? And in particular for me, as it related to my cycle, it was really important for me to work on the stress assessment and addressing outside of the 5 to 7 days before my period, and then I was able to implement and be doing certain things 5 to 7 days before, and that really was a game changer for me. Again, this is 15, 20 years ago, and I still work on this. So one of the other things that I've identified is that the different ways that you address stress is really important to also look at. As I mentioned, I know when laughing is going to work for me. I know when a bath is going to work for me, my magnesium salt bath. I know when exercise is going to work for me. So over time, because this is a habit, and the addressing of the stress, I've really started to be able to figure those pieces out. So again, this is our newest tool. It's for you all. It also is part of what our coaches are trained to do, and what we're doing in our programs when we talk about stress check-ins and working on that. We also have programs that are specifically designed to address stress, things like our magnesium calcium optimizer, looking at cancer risk reduction, our Immunity Plus program, which is not live for anyone at this point. We have some people in it. It's on our beta, but it'll be live soon. Our men's health program. So several of the programs have their digestive tune-up. Several of the programs have the stress check-in piece built in. And thank you, whoever was mentioning that. Looks terrific. I'm excited. I'm really excited about it, and to bring it all to you on that part. So if there are no questions, I'm happy to call it on that piece. But if there are some questions, I'm also happy to answer them. Hydration. A wonderful way to address stress. Okay. All right, so I will call it for today. If any questions come up about the tool, if you don't have the toolkit, this is the current tool. If you have the toolkit but you purchased a while ago and you're not a member, you can always rejoin the membership, and then as a result, for $80, you're able to get the tool this month. If you're thinking about purchasing the toolkit and the membership, now's the time to do it, so you get this tool. The easiest way to deal with any of that is to either flag us here, ask us a question. You're welcome to DM us, or to email hello@thebetternutritionprogram.com. And you can also sign up to join us for a demo, especially if you want to hear about any of the programs or see the other tools in the toolkit. Okay. All right, everyone. I hope you have a good rest of the week. Take care.